Coogs, house, and fans of Hakeem Olajuwon everywhere. It's time for book club.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, a podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater that came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. We appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day. At this point, we're in the afternoon talking about our book club. It's Monday afternoon. Book club on Dream, the life and legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon, written by New York Times bestseller, also a writer at The Ringer, Miran Fader. We're talking about the Phi Slama Jama chapters in this one today, chapters 4 through 8. So we're going to speak on them as if you've read them. So if you have not, feel free to go buy the book wherever you get your books, also linked in the show notes here. But also, if you want to just use this as a preview of sorts, we've also got previous chapters and previous episodes on the playlist on YouTube. So make sure you check us out there. It's our longest episode to date in this. We want to make sure we hit all 4 chapters about the University of Houston and his time there. We'll have other sections that, all cover big parts of his career as well. But Hakeem Olajuwon, for my money, is the best athlete to come through the U of H. So why waste time? Let's jump on in with Miran and start talking about his ticket to Houston, very literally. I've loved how each chapter is a single word. Like center, Yomi.
Me as a writer to help me figure out what it means. Yeah.
Chapter 4 is called Ticket. Mm-hmm. And this is the moment where we myth bust for a second. So while peek behind the curtain here, we're recording before the book's out in public, unless you live in Newport, apparently. But I want to talk about this as if people have read it, because this will not be out until after the book is out. And so this part of this won't be. This is the myth busting. This is the jaw dropping. This is what I've heard this story every single time in my life told, specifically told one way. There's a Phi Slama Jama documentary that tells the story one way. And then Miran Fader does her research and is like, you're all wrong.
Yeah.
He never even went to St. John's. That's all made up.
Yes. And nobody was waiting for him from St. John's. Nobody scheduled a meeting with him from St. John's. Nobody called them from St. John's. Email wasn't a thing back then, but nobody had contact with Chris Pond, the man that, quote, discovered Olajuwon in Lagos. So essentially, as people that listen to your podcast, they're very familiar with the tale, and it is a tale because it's what makes it so dreamlike. Somehow Chris Pond, he sees Olajuwon. He's so impressed by him. Oh my God, you could play basketball in America. Next day they're at the embassy. Next day they get a visa. Then he lands at JFK. Oh my God, it's so cold. I cannot bear to be in, New York. I've got to go to somewhere warmer. Okay, I'm going to go to Houston. Guy Lewis doesn't bring a cab because I'm not good enough and he doesn't care. And then I get out of the cab and I'm so tall and they fall in love with me. And then we become Phi Slama Jama, and then it's amazing. And it's a documentary. The truth is, and I did so much research into this. I did a FOIA request to find out more about Chris Pond. Did he actually work for the State Department as he claimed? He did not.
Which is, keep going.
I don't know. So the other thing is that this isn't just, again, I just want to remind people how journalism works. I am looking through all the archives, all the articles written at the time, Houston Post, Houston Chronicle, UPI, every single thing at the time. New York Times called Chris Pond a, quote, State Department official. Not just an employee, but an official.
And you're about to tell us that he
is not. But
how do you get that part wrong? That's very cool.
To the defense. And that's the nuance in the chapter and the complexity and the unansweredness of it all. We don't know because Chris Pond has passed, although I did get to interview his only surviving sibling, Jennifer. We don't know. And I interviewed a lot of players that played for Chris Pond in the Central African Republic who have nothing but good things to say about him. So it is far more complex. And I encourage people to read through it. But a source in the State Department told me that, you could loosely work alongside the State Department back then. Like there was a lot of, like contractors and people that, essentially what you'd call a freelancer today. So it's possible that he was in that capacity, but he was never an employee. He was never full time. So, it was just wrong, that part. He had connections in the basketball community in Africa because he did coach in Liberia. I was able to verify that. He did coach in the Central African Republic. I was able to verify that. Like I said, I interviewed people that played for him, but it is through all these interviews, this sense that he really wanted to be this kind of all-world recruiter, and that didn't exist back then. There wasn't like this network of international scouts. He was almost the first in that regard. And so maybe he was trying to seem like he had more connections than he really did because, I interviewed the St. John's coaches that are still alive and they're like, we never had any contact with Olajuwon. So I don't know if Chris Pon's plan was to, fly him to New York and then Hakeem would get there and the St. John's coaches would be like, I don't know who you are. Like, we don't even know that next step because it never happened. But, there was according to my reporting, there was absolutely no plan for him to visit St. John's, let alone have a spot on the basketball team, which is how it's presented every year. Did St. John's miss out on Olajuwon? Like it was not even that far along in the recruiting. So, and then I also mentioned a bunch of other schools that Chris Pond mentioned that he had visits for because Hakeem literally did have a plane ticket to various places, but I called all of those coaches and they were like, no, we never had any contact, any plans for Olajuwon. So what to do with such a mystery? It is just that. That's why there is so much fun in Olajuwon's story because it's so improbable and it's so mythical and we love that. But I am very wary, especially after reporting Giannis, of like the kind of white savior coach that, quote, discovers a player.
Right.
And how that story is presented over time. And so it really just needed like 2024 journalism to look back and try to see what was what.
And I want to talk about the coach aspect this second when we get to Guy V. Lewis too. But in simplest terms, because there is so much myth around it, feel free to say this is just an opinion after reading a bunch, because I don't mean to say that this is necessarily reporting. You're a fantastic reporter, but I don't mean to make this into reporting. How random was it that he ended up at Houston?
Random in the sense that, what's his face? Chris Pond was not like extraordinarily close with Guy Lewis or anything like that. In fact, even Guy Lewis's own son could not tell me where they met. There's no recollection of where they met. And the lone assistant surviving coach, Donnie Schwerik, also wasn't sure. So they have some connection, but it's a loose tie. It isn't like, oh, my good buddy Guy Lewis got him in. So it is very much like this by chance. There's not a strong relationship there, at least one that people, know a lot about. I think people would remember that if they were close or anything like that. But they weren't. And it was seen as kind of weird. Like, who is this Chris Pond guy? So I think the plan was to go to Houston all along because that Guy Lewis was actually expecting him because, again, they were on the phone together and they're like, yeah, I've got this player. And Guy Lewis is kind of like, okay, let's see what he's got. It wasn't like, great, I can't wait for this star to join our team. It wasn't like that. There was a conversation. And there was no other conversation like that with any of the other coaches that Pond claimed to have visitation for.
And I love the anecdote. It was the Guy Lewis, before he sees Hakeem, assumes he's going to be like 6'1".
He's like, okay, yeah, you got a player for me, all right.
He's a center. Okay, he'll be 6'2", like whatever.
Right. Because and that's the thing at that time, which I really tried to like show the world of what international hoops. It wasn't like it is now. There were so few international players, let alone players from Africa. So there's really no blueprint for this. So Guy Lewis is like, sure, I've seen others try out. You think they're 6'8", but they're actually 6'0". He had such low expectations that it really wasn't a big deal. And that's why I think that's why people love the mythology of this, because it is so improbable.
Well, and again, to reference, this is 20 years before like Tony Kukoc. I mean, this is not
Right.
this is a long time before we're in the
Right.
world we are today,
Right.
where like every MVP candidate was not born here, right?
Right. Right.
The chapter is titled Hakeem with an A, and I want to talk about that some as well. And we're I don't mean to slowly move through this and take all your time, Marin, but there's
Oh,
just so much here. Um, I thought as a Houston Cougar person, you did an excellent job of talking about who Guy Lewis is without making the story about Guy Lewis, because Guy Lewis is the coach. The book's about Hakeem, right? Um, I like I like Guy Lewis as both a teacher and coach and a historian and those kind of things a lot. I will say that he has a historical legacy that as a fan, I guess I'll sit on. What did you know about Guy Lewis, and what did
yeah.
you find out about Guy Lewis?
Got to admit, SoCal girl, really didn't know anything. I knew the name. I've come from a family of UCLA Bruins, so I knew the game of the century, but that is about it. Big Kareem fans here. So I didn't know, I did not know anything. I was in awe of reading like Texas historians like Robert Jacobus, Frank Andre Gurdy, like all these people that have spent their life work on Texas sports. I had no idea the history of integration of Houston. And I thought it was so important to talk about that because, kind of like how you started this interview, it is very important to note about Third Ward and this neighborhood, right? He doesn't just go anywhere. He goes to a place of a legacy of one of the largest segregated areas in the country. He goes to a place where Guy Lewis was one of the first to integrate teams. I also wanted to give Guy Lewis his flowers, not because he integrated teams, but because he was actually a good basketball coach and people just think he rolled the balls out. And
Thank you.
it was just like he was a really good coach. And I can't tell you how many people told me all about Guy Lewis and not just the funny mannerisms and, dunk the damn ball. Like his act, that was horrible. Nobody come for me. I'm not from here. But, a lot of the the teaching and the preparation and, people just didn't want to give him credit. And I got to be honest, I think there's a tinge of racism there because I think Houston has been characterized as having all Black teams. And so Guy Lewis's own coaching has been not respected because people just say, oh, quote, you always have a bunch of athletes, which again is like these racially coded terms.
Yeah. Quick pause in the action here to talk to you about our buddies over at FanDuel, because you got to get ready to tackle some NFL action at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get a bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sports app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, check out live stats, view the play-by-play, whatever you can do all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You start with $150 in bonus bets. You place your first $5 bet. Win or lose, place $5 down. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
And it's not fair to both those athletes who are so smart and amazing, like intellectual, fundamentally sound players, but also Guy Lewis, who was always prepared. So number one, I just want to say that. Number two, had no idea about the integration history, but I also wanted to make it clear in the book that like, it's not like Guy Lewis, and again, this is from my reporting, talking to so many people that knew him. It's not that he had this moral imperative saying like, we've got to integrate and Black players need the same opportunities as whites. Like, make no mistake, like he wanted to win. Like
it was an edge. It was 100% an edge. Yes, he could win with players. He knew that there were better players to go get.
Exactly, because one of the figures that I talked about was this guy named Marvin Blumenthal, who was actually the first to integrate pickup games at the JCC. And so I went to the JCC and I learned all about this history. And Guy Lewis would just sit there and watch these, Black players play with white players. And he would say to himself through the influence of Blumenthal, like, we've got to find a way to do this at University of Houston. So I put all that in there to show that, it is not surprising to me the way that Hakeem's story would be, misunderstood, the misconceptions about where he came from, because he's coming into not just the South, but the deep South, not just a place, but the first place of integration. there's literally a game that he plays in, and there is a sign that says "Cage the Cougars." That is the era that he joins University of Houston, and you cannot separate that from the perception of him.
No, but there's got to be some intentionality. Maybe it's just historical luck or the luck of a writer. The man who integrates the first Southwest Conference basketball. I mean, like Guy Lewis is integral to integration in
Right.
basketball in the South, and then he also brings in the first big time African player. Like that. That seems to be, while a very different kind of revolutionizing, somewhat similarly in the way that they would work, right?
Yes. There is also the fact that a lot of the players on the team were Black, and Hakeem felt comfortable relating to them about what it is like to be in Africa. And his African American teammates were talking to him about what it is like to be Black in the South in America. So it led to really interesting conversations about history and colonialism and racism and segregation. And Eric Davis, the point guard, he was one of the best interviews in the book. It was through all these conversations with Hakeem that he himself would end up converting to Islam, and he would take his first trip to Nigeria. And it was all because of these conversations with Hakeem.
Fascinating section of the book here when he first gets to the University of Houston, and he's like working, not really playing, and working at the rec center, and the rec center plays a big role in the book too. But he's this tall, lanky, skinny kid from Africa at the end of the bench. And I say kid from Africa as opposed to Nigeria because that's what he was referenced by reporters as. Like I'm not trying to trying to be broad.
Of course.
And he goes by Hakeem because he's too polite to correct anyone. And you find a tidbit where one woman has it right for a hot second.
Listen to the women journalists. I'm sorry.
But she gets shut down. So talk us through the TLDR quick 2 seconds of that story. But then also, like, when you saw that, you're like, what's the reaction when you first see that?
Okay. So you guys know I'm a sports writer. I'm a woman. There's like very few of us. Most of us are on TV. So the fact that there is one like woman sports writer back then is a miracle to me. Like the fact that there's so few now, couldn't believe there was one back then. And Tracy Dodds is her name, fantastic writer. And she's on the beat, and Hakeem is there, but he's not really playing. He's not on the team yet. It's just like he's on the end of the bench and nobody is talking about it. It's very confusing. Who is this kid? They hear he's from Africa. Guy Lewis is pretending that Hakeem can't speak English. Literally, he says that to the press. He cannot speak English. He's not doing interviews, which is false.
Which may have been to protect him, but it was also a little icky. Can I I want to say both things can be true.
And that's what I tried to show in the book. Not good, but I understand where he was coming from, but it wasn't right. Anyways, and that is fully fleshed out in the book. So Tracy, being the amazing journalist she is, being not a homer like many of the other men covering at the time who were buddy with Guy Lewis, she walked right up to Hakeem and was like, "Hi, I'm Tracy. I would like to write a story on you. Can you imagine?" Like, honestly, the woman journalist in me was just like, "Tracy, I need to meet you. I'm obsessed with you. Like, I love you. Like, this is so cool. Like, you paved the way for me."
Oh, and then 20 years later, he's a Hall of Famer.
So I literally it's such a good story. And so she literally, they talk, they have a good convo. Again, back in the day when you could just walk up to a player and you didn't have to fight for 2 minutes in a corner. Yeah, I'm not bitter. And she asked him to write down his name on a paper, and he wrote it Hakeem. I mean, he wrote it Hakeem. Sorry, guys, I haven't had enough cold brew. He writes it with an H. Everyone thinks his name is with an A. And I discovered through this anecdote, as well as the reporting, that basically what happened, a secretary accidentally wrote his name with an A because it sounded like an A, because the H was silent the way that people sounded it. He never corrected. But when he actually was asked to say his name and print his name, prints it with an H. Tracy goes back to her copy editor, shows them the story. She's like, "Oh, you poor stupid woman sports writer, you don't know his name. It's actually with an A." He's like, "No, he wrote it." No, I can't. Like, I can just picture it right now. And he's like, "No, I swear, look, it's in my notebook. He wrote it for me." And they're like, "No, it's not."
Meanwhile, that's a glorified autograph from Hakeem Olajuwon. 20.
I couldn't even. And then the story never runs because they think she's trying to outdo the beat reporter, a guy that's been on the beat. And so they shut down her story. She's the only person that knows his real name. And she is basically put down. And all these years later, she is now right. And I'm very happy to include that in there. But what it shows is people got his name wrong and he didn't correct it. And that is official, because that is the way he saw his name. And I think a lot of people erroneously think that, oh, both are correct or one is silent, and it wasn't right.
No, and I think there's also again, speaking as a guy that lived in Texas most of his life, I think there's an aspect of like the same kind of coded racism or whatever, where people say like, oh, he just didn't know much English and so he said it,
Right.
and that's how people heard him or whatever. It's like, no, he spoke plenty good English. So there's a layer to that as well. So he spends the first year more or less working out, and then he goes and plays the Rec. The Rec's a big deal, not just because Houston Rockets are there. Moses Malone, a Hall of Famer in his own right, and one of the greatest players of all time in his own right, is there, and another pioneer in his own right actually is there. As someone who's from Southern California, where there's plenty of good pickup basketball, you first hear of the Fondi Rec Center, and what goes through your head?
I'm immediately like, okay, OG Drew League. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Like,
thank you. Yes, yes.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, and like the modern day version of, the players that play at UCLA now. Like, it, to me, I was like so excited about in fact, Fondi was my first stop. First time I went to Houston, got off the plane, just drove to Fondi. And it has like this whole like awards, not like shelf, but like glass case. And you just feel the history as soon as you walk in. You just feel it. Even like Drew League, they don't have that type of commemoration the way that Fondi does. And so I felt like I was walking into this like just this, oh my God, legends were here. Like, you feel there's a picture of Moses, there's a picture of Hakeem, there's Clyde, there's all these people, and you feel the history as soon as you walk in. And then you start talking to people and they're like, oh yeah, one time I was here and Hakeem like totally messed this guy up, and he was so good, and the guy, whatever. And I'm thinking like, this is an anecdote from like 1990. He's like, oh no, that was in 2000, like post retirement. I was like, oh, okay.
All right. So I want to quickly pause to tell you about our buddies over at Game Time. If you're looking for tickets to a Rockets game, a Cougs game, a concert, theater, whatever you're looking for, comedy show, anything, you can get those tickets at Game Time. I love the all-in pricing, no surprises on pricing. I love the lowest price guarantee. What Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You can find tickets in the same section and row cheaper somewhere else. Go visit Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks on the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time.
So again, man of the people, right? So a tremendous respect and just fun reporting out the Fondi part. It was very fun. Those were games, and people came to watch pickup games. Imagine like the way people come to the Drew League. That was how it was then, but you didn't have to pay. It wasn't like on social media. It was just like, especially for those kids that couldn't afford Rockets games, like they just got to go and like see Clyde Drexler playing a pickup game, which is so cool.
Well, and you mentioned that the athletes there knew what they were a part of too. You mentioned like the kids that can't afford games. There's people doing things for those kids, giving them gear, signatures, whatever. It's a cool part of basketball folklore in Houston.
Right.
Did it still have like that kind of aura to it when you went to it recently?
It did, but it was kind of sad because the director, James Robinson, who's been there for like 20 years, he was like, it's just not the same. He was like, there was this feeling of like, it's not the same anymore. And catching guys who are still there, who go every morning, it was this You know, like when you talk with people about how good Hakeem used to be and everyone lights up, and there's, when people talk about their favorite times in the past and nostalgia, that's how it felt like to be in Fondi. There, this idea that this rich thing is gone. It's not dead, it's just not what it was. And there's a certain sadness there. But then when you all get to talking about memories and stuff, it's just such a joyous circle of people just, oh, remember that one time, and so it's almost like, to me, it's like a basketball like museum. Like, okay, this is a place of history. It's not what it was, but it's important to acknowledge what it used to be.
Mirren, in wrapping up talking about Fondi and the theory of this like rec gym and the legends that those are in, Black Houston ties a lot to this book. It's very central, I think, to the earliest stages of Hakeem. And there's Black Houston, and then he runs into and expands his community with Muslim Houston, and then even further to Nigerian Houston. Like there's kind of these moments where like different parts of Houston pop up a lot. When you went to Fondi, and this is more of a present tense question. You did say the book was rooted in the present, I guess, though. What aspects of that part of Houston were still present, relevant there? I mean, it's not the JCC by any stretch, right?
Right.
Which also plays a central role in the pickup game folklore. But what aspects of that were still there? Because it is kind of seminal and for like him finding a place in Houston in a different sort of community.
Yeah, like to this day, I think when you walk into Fondi, there's these like glass cases, and it has all the history of all the, former players that have played there. And, you just look at how many amazing, talented players played there. Most of them were Black. And it was really important to talk about the history and the rich cultural history of Third Ward and, all of these places where, dating back to the civil rights movement, there were sit-ins. And, Houston has such a rich history of of resistance. And I think it's interesting that of all the places that Hakeem goes, he goes to a place that was like the first to integrate their basketball team, right? He goes to a place where pickup games at Fondi at the JCC were among the first to be integrated. That is interesting. It's important to talk about that context because, people really didn't know what to make of him because they really didn't know anybody from Africa. So I think, Houston's such a melting pot. It's such a diverse and vibrant city. So I thought it was really important to put that history in there.
It's a melting pot kind of city in the same kind of, it's not New Orleans, and I don't mean to like lump in with New Orleans. I think New Orleans has its own set, but it feels somewhere that there's just so many different cultures happening at one time. I would tell people that are not from the South that they, maybe think of Houston as the big metropolitan city that maybe kind of get beneath the surface there if Houston's got more of that feel to it. But if people listen to this, I would assume know that. So I don't need to tell anyone things they already know. The next chapter, I think, is going to be the one that's really important and fun to a lot of people listening to this show. And that is, again, with all of them being one word, it's called Slama. And I have to say, while there are a lot of things that we've talked about that I didn't know before reading this book, and I consider, again, I teach history by day. I love this man as much as you can love someone you don't actually know. And the Phi Slama Jama line was a reported throwaway line.
Yeah,
the name was a throwaway. I have it on my literal shirt right now, unintentionally.
I know.
It was a throwaway line.
It's so funny.
Look, as a writer, that can't a throwaway line. That's ridiculous.
So also the columnist Tommy Bonk was a really good writer, and so the thought that he could see that and think throwaway line was like mind-boggling to me. Again, like that's why you want to interview 266 people for this, and interviewing him was so, I wanted to get his whole process. Like, how does one even come up with that? And I just love how he was like, yeah, I never thought this was a thing. I thought I was just filing. When you're a journalist, the story is due. That was a blowout game. It was not supposed to be a big deal. The team they were playing just was not at their level. And so he's just filing like, okay, I did the thing. I'm going home now. And then now everyone wants to put it on a shirt, a mug, a hat. I mean, he's just stunned. Like, he's really shocked because he thought the line was just a throwaway.
And it's filled into things where like we're more than 40 years later, and
Right.
we're still talking about Phi Slama Jama, but also like it's still part of the marketing around athletics in general at University of
Mhm.
Houston, right? It's just a crazy concept. The guy was like, "Oh yeah, just take that. That's fine." I didn't think that like.
And he didn't want to get money from it. That's the other thing. He's never profited a dime from it. Do you know how rich Tommy Bonk would be, respectfully?
Also, respectfully, I've got plenty of listeners and commenters that would tell us that if Houston had to pay for it, they would not have used the line. So that may have worked out for the best. So in Slamma, you hit the first year in Houston, and again, I think he both dominates and has growing pains in a weird way that I thought you did a pretty good job of explaining here, because he is so new to basketball still, but he's just such a gifted athlete and has such a crazy motor, drive, passion, whatever, right? I laughed audibly when they lose in the Southwest Conference tournament and he thinks the year's over.
Oh, yeah.
So
Poor Hakeem thinks that it's over.
like, and in the way that this book functions, and like he's growing up, right? He's coming of age and so much. It feels like, again, I teach by day. It feels like a young child like losing a recess game and is like upset and it driven to tears over losing. When it's like, hey, we're playing again tomorrow, bud.
Right.
So, what was your? Not that it's the part that stuck out the most to you in the story, but as someone that laughed at that, you hear that and you're like, wait a second, I'm interviewing a giant guy that cried after losing a basketball game. Like, what was your?
I loved it. If people have read the Giannis book, they know that Giannis also cries a lot when he's younger, and like there's this like personal deep sense of like just like shame and internal reckoning when you lose. And I find it so moving because again, it speaks to the competitiveness of both men, even as children. But with this anecdote, which I got from Jim Nance, which awesome connection here.
Go Coogs, Jim Nance. Go Coogs.
Go Coogs. Like he's the one that gave me this anecdote. And he's just, before he's Mr. Hall of Fame broadcaster, he's just like a student PA announcer. And he feels so bad watching Hakeem in the corner look absolutely inconsolable. And he's like, how do I break it to him? We're still in the game. We're still in the race. And I think to me, the anecdote speaks to how Hakeem was so naturally gifted and had so much going for him. And it's even more impressive because he literally didn't know every single rule that there was as far as how it worked, right? There was no like Final Four in Nigeria at that time. So it's like it really speaks to how much he cared about the game, right? He's this accidental superstar, but then in this moment, you really can tell how much it means to him. And I think that's so moving.
Well, and you mentioned there's no Final Four. I mean, we're more than a decade prior to the Dream Team and the globalization of how pretty the NBA game is and stuff. And so the idea that a kid that grew up in Lagos would have any idea what the Final Four was it's not like he was not intelligent. He's obviously very intelligent. They're just not a thing people knew about.
Right.
I think it's interesting, and I want your take on this because he comes back to this later, and I think it's really important when he comes back to it later. But basketball is both like hyper important to him in that moment, and at other parts of his early college life, it's like basketball's just the thing I do.
Mm-hmm.
And like the swinging back and forth of that, I think is really central to him. And again, we'll hit more when he kind of reconciles with that later. I think it's really important and part of his journey as he, as Islam comes back into his life in a major way, that things become bigger than basketball later. But did you notice that in hearing about early college Hakeem, that he also had that perspective, or is that just me pulling stuff out of the book because I know I knew the spoilers at the end. I knew the story a little bit.
No, that's so spot on. And like, it's so interesting when you work on a book for so long, you don't pick up on certain things or certain things don't occur to you. And then somebody reads it and you're like, oh yeah, like that's so true. So yeah, like, even though I didn't think of it how you did, you're so right. That's absolutely correct. I think that was what was cool about watching him blossom, to your point about maturation and growing up at Houston, is that he began to love it, right? This isn't a love at first sight thing. We have a lot of, in America, we have a lot of, I picked up a ball, I knew I wanted to be in the NBA. There's just something to be said for like a late bloomer that takes time to fall in love. And if you see how the early ejections and fouls and things that he would have in the NBA that actually started in college. And I think it's just because he really was falling deeper in love with the game. So whether it's expressed in a technical foul or, feeling so sad that you think the season's over because you lost in the tournament, the conference tournament, I think it's really cool to watch it change for him, right? Like basketball matters. I think it's less of an identity thing and more of a competitiveness thing. It isn't like, oh, this is me my whole life. I think it's just like I have a drive inside of me and I hate to lose. I think that's what he's seeing about himself.
Well, and he gets very quickly to year 2 at Houston, and he is no longer. I don't mean to say he's not a young man because he's still very young. He's a early college student, but he's no longer the cute, adorable young. Oh my
Right.
God, who could this guy be? Kind of athlete. He's like clearly the best player in America kind of athlete, a dominant force in college basketball. And then, they ultimately have this heartbreaking, crushing defeat at the end of that, right, with NC State and everything. And I guess my question to you, and again, because we're assuming readers at this point have read a couple chapters of this and understand and are with us in the story, what did you see as a reporter covering? Because again, you're having to go back in time to do this in a lot of ways. Year 1 to year 2 of Hakeem playing at Houston, because there's a definitely different perception of him. It feels like from the outside, but on the inside, like, is he also now like not just the man, but a man, or what's happening there?
Yeah. I mean, on 2 levels, I think perception goes from, they even call him this is a quote, the young innocent from Africa, which is so problematic, but it just shows the way he was like infantilized. They very much saw him as this like adorable, look how sweet and kind he is, what a polite, he bows, when he meets people. The second year is like, whoa, okay, you played at Fondi all summer. You're throwing an elbow back. It's less like, look at the innocent person and okay, got a little muscle, because if you look at early pictures, his body is transforming. He's
Yeah.
literally gaining muscle. He's learning how to lift weights. He did not, to the coaches' knowledge at Houston, he really did not lift weights before this point. So he's stronger physically. He is more tough mentally. He has a little bit of confidence about him because you cannot go to Fondi and act like an innocent, I don't know what I'm doing here. You
Right.
have to like, and he's got the slang. And oh my God, one of the funniest things, like him learning like, American basketball, like hoop slang, and him, players will say, I'm going to rock your world. But they described it to me as him saying, now I am going to rock your world. Like really like proper, like, but the point is, no matter how he said it, it's definitely like there's a little bit of an edge there. Like, okay, I'm going to rock your world. And so I think like the press starts looking at him differently, and they're so shocked because all they've been hearing about is that guy over at Georgetown, Patrick Ewing. And so they're like, wait, could this person like develop into that? So it's like it's almost like the press is grappling with it in real time. We didn't have social media, but through their columns, you see the way they're sort of like watching this person grow.
Well, and he grows into by the third year of Phi Slama, right, where Houston is looking to win the elusive title. They've had the heartbreak. They've been there literally before twice.
Right.
They were the upstart team. They were the dominant team. They got upset, and now they're in there trying to win it all again. And there's like a lot of, and the book does a good job of outlining. So I don't mean to make you go word for word through everything, but there's a lot of dysfunction happening around him in that last year at the University of Houston. It just doesn't quite fit. And people that have played sports, whether it was whatever level people that played at Division III, etc. You've been on teams that don't fit if you play
Right.
long enough. And could you get any inkling? Any insight as to what things weren't fitting, or was it just like you could tell and looking back and reporting and talking to people that were there that there was a lot of things not fitting?
I think it's more of a mix of things. I think they were so famous, and I wonder if that attention was starting to like really seep through, because it is hard when you turn into celebrities overnight, right? Like before Texas, who plays basketball in Texas? Like it's just a football state. And I think everyone was so like giddy about this run. And I wonder if that attention really got to them and their focus. The other thing was like the underdogs suddenly weren't the underdogs anymore. Like they were the ones seen as the favorite. And that can really psychologically mess with you, you know, like NC State was coming into that game like, oh, you know, they're Goliath, we're David. And the Cougars were used to being that their like entire college career. So I think that was odd. I also think it was just a testament to how well NC State played and their game plan and slowing them down and just getting after it. You know, like all the people I talked to from NC State were just like, we believed we could do it. You know, we absolutely believed we could do it. You know, my uncle always said to me, you know, when I played, like, you know, honestly, the winner is just like who has more points when the buzzer sounds. So sometimes you just run out of time. And I think like if one thing goes different, right? Like that Benny Anders like near steal, or you know, where was Hakeem on that last play? Why wasn't he up top? I mean, you could go through it again and again and again. And I think that it really just came down to like one moment.
All right. So we're moving through Phi Slama Jama, looking at how these things are starting to crumble as some of those heartbreaking losses go. Mary does a great job on this book. Really did a great job of breaking things down from start to finish of the career and life of one of the greatest athletes and the greatest Houston Cougar to ever walk. Hakeem is a great person. This is a great read. Highly recommend you go get it. Use the show notes, find a link in your area. You can also use Amazon or wherever you get your books these days. Locked on Cougs. Bring it back to you tomorrow. Break down more football and basketball and all the other things going on. But we want to make sure we take a pause to read as well. Locked on Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.